boosting against the proof of weapon network. Okay, now let's go straight into part one, where we're going to be discussing this week in Bitcoin. So in the public Bitcoin companies, we had lots of earnings announcements, and we've only got a few of them that are part of the non-Bitcoin mining companies that are publicly traded on the most liquid capital market in the world, which is the United States, NASDAQ, and New York Stock Exchange. But Coinbase, which was a company I invested in early, and other Bank to the Future investors invested in the private equity thereof before it did the $100 billion IPO many, many years later, they have now reported $2.3 billion in revenue for Q4, and that is a 23% higher than expected. Now, I didn't dig too deep into any of the new reporting requirements that are now possible, but that was a 23% higher than expected, which sent the Coinbase price above most of the other stocks in the market. Another Bank to the Future portfolio company, when we invested in the private equity and I was a shareholder in, is Robinhood. Robinhood reported that it had brought in $350 million in revenue from crypto trading. Now, compare that to the stock trading, which is their core product. It was $60 million for stock broking or stock trading, whatever they call that. That is a 6 times more revenue that came from the crypto part of the business, the Bitcoin and crypto part of the business, relative to their traditional stock. So a lot of other brokers are going to be seeing that. And now, while these come from two different models, Coinbase was a crypto company. At Bank to the Future, we ended up selling our US broker-dealer to Coinbase because it wanted to adjust to being a traditional broker. But in the Biden administration, there was a very aggressive SEC lawsuit that was filed against it, and it couldn't use that broker-dealer that it acquired from Bank to the Future, the company I co-founded in 2018. And Robinhood is the opposite. They came as a broker and they got into crypto. So there was these two different models. And then the SEC came after that model as well. But now we're in the Trump administration, where they have a crypto SAR, and the crypto SAR has been announcing that it's going to be like trade unions type thing. I don't think trade unions is right. Trade groups, let's say. And then these trade groups are headed up by different people that are part of the ecosystem that all have an interest. And there is a frenzy of people that are all trying to get in there in order to make sure that their companies have the favorable type of representation that all the different parts of the ecosystem needs, as America aims to fulfill its mission of becoming the crypto capital of the world, while El Salvador reigns as the Bitcoin capital of the world. But I think a lot of other brokers are going to want to get into this. So we at Bank to the Future had 3 different brokers in the US, and none of them, we were able to use them in various different degrees. We allowed to get a lot of people into early funding rounds of many of the largest Bitcoin companies when they were a lot smaller as private equity. But none of them, as the hostile environment in the US prevailed, were able to do much. So we ended up selling those and various other things. Now we expect a turnaround. So make sure that the brokers are all going to be following the money. And if there is a path to registration, the floodgates are going to open. If they know that in the case of Robinhood, it is 6 times more profitable to offer your crypto services than your stock services. So watch out for that. Also, a meme coin stock, the original meme coin stock, let's call it, or meme stock, was GameStop, GME. GameStop, if you remember, it had that very famous activist movement where it was coming up against the Citadel shorter, and it wiped out the hedge fund industry and made it, through a short squeeze, lock in ginormous losses. And then it used its regulatory capture in order to co-opt the SEC, knock on the doors of the proof of weapons network, and but there was this bottom-up movement against it. And as a result of that, it's got this $4.6 billion balance sheet and not much of a business, because it's kind of a legacy business, which is a physical shop for gaming, but a rampant community. And they made an announcement this week that they are going to be using their balance sheet in order to potentially invest in Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, they called it. Now, one MicroStrategy has become, now known as Strategy, has become the cornerstone of the Bitcoin treasury strategy. It looks like GameStop could do something pretty interesting, not my cup of tea, but it's got that kind of meme community where it would probably YOLO into all sorts of crazy crypto and create all sorts of craziness with a multi-billion-dollar balance sheet, a pro-crypto environment in the US, a public company, and a rampant community of memers and activists that want to YOLO into that stock and use some of the MicroStrategy type of learnings in order to create some of the craziest environments. Now, do remember, GameStop, just upon the announcement, the price of GameStop went up 20%. And there was a photo op between the GameStop CEO and Michael Saylor last week, there was one this week with Bukele, the president of El Salvador, and Michael Saylor meeting as well, creating a bit of speculation around what is happening there. But this could be an interesting play. Now, do remember, in 2022, when the Proof of Weapons Network through Operation Choke Point 2.0 wanted to implant, for example, SBF into the FTX Ponzi scheme, and the Israeli shell company Celsius that were headed up by Alex Majinsky, those frauds were able to use tokens in order to mark them to market to cover up their fraud. So as part of the regulatory environment ahead, there needs to be some clarity around how you discount certain illiquid assets as you start to go with less liquid assets than Bitcoin, which is incredibly liquid. But remember, that is what gave the ability to manipulate those prices and hide all of the fraud that was happening and wipe out billions of dollars that was then weaponized by the Federal Reserve when they hiked rates, took out the crypto-friendly banks, and then used that in order to hand over a chunk of the industry to BlackRock and various other institutions as it executed a TradFi takeover of various parts of the ecosystem prior to the Trump administration. So now that all their buddies can make a shit ton of money from this industry, as we have seen time and time again with the Federal Reserve in the 20 different pump and dumps that it has been reported to have created since its inception in 1913, with the most infamous being the Roaring '20s that then led to the Great Depression of the '30s, which then led to the confiscation of American people's gold, which then leads to the questions around auditing the Federal Reserve, because it's likely that gold, the Treasury thinks they got gold, but the Federal Reserve may have used that as collateral and ended up stealing it from the American people, which becomes hugely relevant as we go through some of the scandals like USAID that are being exposed right now. I digress. Let's get back into the Bitcoin market. Meanwhile, in the other side of the world, in Japan, remember, Japan is a conduit of a post-World War II country that was occupied by the Bank of Japan, which was a member of the Bank for International Settlements that was created in the interwar periods between World War I and World War II. And when the New World Order was set up post-World War II, Bretton Woods, Germany became occupied by a debt-based Ponzi scheme. Japan became occupied by a debt-based Ponzi scheme, and Italy became occupied by a debt-based Ponzi scheme as it created the Proof of Weapons Network. And we ended up with what became later this Japan carry trade, where people can borrow at 0% from the Bank of Japan and use that to speculate on stocks and then create derivatives in order to hedge out some of the risks. Well, in order to resist against that, there are very large savings within Japan by the individuals. But public company Metaplanet, who Japan is a one of the top stock markets in the world. It is now acquired 21,000 Bitcoin on its balance sheet, worth $2 billion. Basically, if you look at when it launched this Bitcoin strategy to where the price of that stock is today, it's up approximately 4,800% and beat every stock on the Japan stock exchange as well. So just like strategy, formerly MicroStrategy, beat every S&P stock by using a Bitcoin treasury strategy, we're seeing the same type of results within Japan, showing that it can be done in different countries as well. And now we're getting the Rumble type of experiment that we're seeing as well, and with private companies. And we're also getting the ones that we might be seeing with GameStop as well. But anyway, GameStop has $4.6 billion of cash balance. And at the same time, the originator of the public leverage, the fiat currency proof of weapons network, in order to invest into the inflation long-term resistant peaceful proof of work network Bitcoin strategy, has now bought this week another 7,633 Bitcoin worth. That's just under another $1 billion, $742 million. At the same time, another one of the early companies that raised finance through Bank to the Future with our investors, I'm a shareholder as well, Exodus, they rung the bell, and they are now approaching, and they went over a $2.5 billion market cap as they went publicly traded. It had a little bit of a correction into the $2 billion market cap. But as we see more and more interest in public companies, now the market is growing and growing and growing. There were rumors about BitGo, which is a custodian. They help some of the exchanges custody their Bitcoin and provide API technology, MPC technology, basically under a corporate structure. You don't want to hold your own private keys as a director, but you do want to have a corporate structure whereby it requires like multi-factor authentication when you're storing client assets in custody, when you have fiduciary duties, and you want to be able to change that if a director leaves the company, or that type of governance structure. Well, BitGo was one of the first to provide that, and they're getting ready to do their initial public offering and join. There's rumors as well that they should be public later this year. Last round they did was at approximately $1.75 billion. That was their funding round, lots of TradFi institutions. So they're looking, it looked like they may be one of the next companies, as well as some of our other portfolio companies that we invested in very early, like Circle, who's launched a USDC stablecoin, and others as well. I expect to see a wave of public offerings into the Trump administration as more and more companies go public, and you get to have a bit of an arbitrage between the traditional TradFi stock market and then some of the more exotic models. And we are starting to go more and more degen and exotic. As America said, we're not focused on Bitcoin, we're focused on crypto. So as I said, remember the speculative attacks like I was talking about with Celsius and FTX, by having a token that you mark to market. And then with GameStop, which is the original short squeeze, you can imagine the shenanigans that can happen when you have a simultaneous token at the same time as you have a stock price. Wait for it. It's going to happen, and we will see lots and lots of drama, and we'll always be covering it on Bitcoin Hard Talk. By the way, we're still trying to get to 100,000 subscribers on this channel. Do me a favor, if you're watching it, if everybody that watches this actually hit the subscribe button, hit the bell symbol, and hit all, we're actually going to make sure that you get all the notifications. But YouTube is completely oppressing our content. We went through a very high growth phase, and when I started covering some of the geopolitical content that they don't want you to hear, we've just been stuck at this 91,000 because they don't want us to get to 100,000. Once we get to 100,000, we get a blue check. And then once we've got a blue check, they have to push that content out wider. So please help me fight the algorithm that we're fighting right now. Hit the subscribe button, hit the bell symbol, hit all, so that I can make sure that we get more and more people to this message, especially as we seem to be revealing the truth now. I think we're moving away from an environment of censorship over to freedom of speech in order to feed the AI algorithm, because they want the data. So I need this message to get out to as many people before AI completely takes over, as we've got this transition phase as well. Anyway, so remember the token share mark-to-market model. As companies like, for example, imagine Uniswap. If they're going public now that they settled with the SEC in this type of environment, and then they also have a token, imagine the games and the shenanigans that can happen. Now, speaking of shenanigans, we remember as part of the Biden administration and the attack upon the industry, there were certain victims that were creating software technology that were privacy enhancing, like Tornado Cash. And the co-founder of Tornado Cash was put in prison because the Biden administration and the Proof of Weapons Network decided that they wanted to have a headline case where the creators of self-custody software are held responsible for how the users use that. And this is a mechanism, just like we saw with the fake war on terror, where you end up with all sorts of Patriot Acts, called Patriot Act in order to remove your freedoms. They need a big case in order to take away your freedoms, and this was one of those. But that was reversed. So Alexei, sorry if I'm saying this wrong, Pertsev, sorry if I'm butchering your name. He was released from prison, and hopefully he will not be going back for creating technology. At the same time, we saw the grifters of the world. Central African Republic, an ex-colonial, try to break free from the French Empire, still under the Proof of Weapons Network of the French franc Proof of Weapons Network, that was later replaced by the European Central Bank and consolidated power, where the European Central Bank put together a Fed-first policy, destroying Europe, allowing it to get destroyed, decreasing its manufacturing base, using covert operations to blow up its gas reserves, gas supplies, and make it, all sorts of things that we're experiencing that destroyed the European economy. The Central African Republic decided to make Bitcoin legal tender, but then immediately got into shitcoinery and crypto shenanigans, and is now going back for its third round. Immediately, the president of Central African Republic went on to X and said, I think he got his inspiration from Trump launching his meme coin. He said, we're launching Central African Republic, CAR meme coin. This is no endorsement of the coin. Please do not mess around with these coins. But the meme coin was launched, immediately I came out and said, this one's not going to end well. They previously already said that they'll do Bitcoin as legal tender, but then they got into crypto shenanigans, and now they're getting into meme coins. It was announced by the president on X, and immediately that created a speculative frenzy that this was a deep fake. And so people were speculating whether it's real, a bit like when the Trump coin launched. And so the insiders got in, and then you end up with a massive rug pull amongst the whole thing. And so what did X do? X shut down the video, and then no one really knew what was going on. And CAR, the meme coin, crashed 97% within 72 hours. And then after that, they announced that they are trying to get the X account revived again. And it's your classic pump and dump, just like we have seen. People new to the market maybe not even remember things like Aurora coin, when we had the official Iceland coin that was a massive pump and dump in the very early days. We have seen these things time and time again, but those that don't know their history or haven't been following my channel or Bitcoin Hard Talk may think that they're inventing something new, but we've seen it time and time again. Rug pulls in the name of making people think that this is financial innovation. But we move to this free market. Everybody lives and learns, and hopefully they don't exit the market and they find that Bitcoin is the solution that they were looking for in the first place. Speaking of which, since the Trump token launch, the meme coin, it is now down approximately 70% upon the initial pump and dump. And his wife's token, Melania, is down 89% since the launch. And it was revealed that in the launch, the crypto lobby were gaining political brownie points by issuing loans to MoonPay, which was the issuer of the token that had a liquidity crisis, and Brad Garlinghouse from Ripple Labs and Galaxy Digital. They issued them a $160 million loans to MoonPay in order to solve that crisis over the weekend so that they could sustain the Trump price surge. And then you can start to look back on chain around those initial injections around who knew it. But this took the price from approximately 200 million of the initial 10 to 20% of the supply. Remember, 80% of the supply wasn't released, and took it from 200 million to $10 billion market cap in the first 48 hours. Welcome to the meme coin pump and dump industry at the highest level, led by the president of the United States, who has an NFT collection, a meme coin for his wife, a stable coin to be launched soon, a DeFi project, a governance token for World Liberty Financial, a company that is going to be issuing a social platform that's integrated with finance, and also a Bitcoin ETF. We revealed last week how to figure out American policy so you can get ahead of it by simply predicting how Trump makes money. And that is the new model that we'll be following for the next 4 years in order to get one step ahead of everything. Now, speaking of which, Hester Pierce, who is somebody that throughout the whole corrupt Operation Choke Point 2.0 was on the SEC chairperson, and was calling out the corruption of Gary Gensler and the opportunity wasted for America, and now has received, the primary position in order to drive forward the mission of what crypto looks like as America wants to become the center of crypto capital. And she came out this week and said that meme coins are likely to fall outside of SEC. So that means that it is a free market and everyone can, the whole idea here is that anyone can do what they want, but we need to educate each other and call out the stuff because that's how it works. And so we need to become wiser to this stuff. But if people want to engage in that and ruin their reputation by trying to rug pull their fans, they end up with the full consequences of that. And fraud is still got fraud laws. So do you really need these additional protections or not? That's what's going to be battled out. And that is really one of the first things after stablecoin regulations are going to be figured out within the US. Is that the SEC that regulates that? Is it the OCC, kind of a subdivision regulator of the Federal Reserve and the proof of weapons network to control the dollar? Or is it going to be CFTC around commodities and the SEC around securities? That territorial battle is going to be resolved in the proof of weapons network as we integrate into more and more traditional financial products integrated with crypto. Now, remember, Bitcoin is proof of work. That means that it doesn't matter who owns it. It's not like proof of stake where you get a stake in it. And so therefore, you can still opt out and you can own your own Bitcoin in self-custody. You can remove counterparty risk. You can send it peer-to-peer with no government interference in terms of who you can send it to. You're accountable if you do things with that money. You still have to follow the law. And you can opt out of the Federal Reserve's inflation and escape debt slavery. Not financial advice, but everybody that has bought Bitcoin every month, regardless of price, done that for a full 4-year cycle, they've beaten every single asset class and all the inflation of the Federal Reserve, even in the ones that are the most affected, like the Zimbabwe proof of weapons network that drives inflation at levels like 900%. Even there, some people have been able to escape that through Bitcoin as well. So with the federal level, we talked about it on previous episodes of Bitcoin Hard Talk, that remember, pre-1913, there was a state banking system and a free banking system before the Federal Reserve took over the dollar and got the government into 36, 37, almost $40 trillion approaching of debt in order to fund all the wars. There was a resistance from the state banking system. But now there are 22 state bank bills that are basically states that are building and looking to implement bills in order to build their Bitcoin strategic reserves. And basically, it means that your state can have a weapon and return if it chooses over time. When we have this battle between Treasury and Federal Reserve, or the Trump administration, I think it's all coming, that the states can protect themselves as well. In fact, one of the states, Wisconsin, their investment sovereign wealth fund has actually disclosed that they now have $321 million of a Bitcoin ETF holding. Now, if you want to go all out like Bekele, then you can own it in self-custody, have a multi-signature MPC structure. Maybe you can use BitGo, or you can use various other companies. And then the state can have a secure structure, publish the wallet address, and then you can make a policy that goes beyond saying we will not sell it. We will use it in order to build backing and reserves. And you can follow the address and see that the state is not selling its Bitcoin. Now, states can eventually get there. Initially, they're doing it through Bitcoin ETFs, but eventually the operations and even some of those ETFs are applying for in-kind redemption, where you could take your Bitcoin ETF, you could convert it for real Bitcoin rather than paper Bitcoin, and then you could do this strategy moving forward as the environment evolves slowly but surely. And all countries, all states, all companies, and certainly all individuals can do that. At the same time, they're deciding in America, as a result of this 100-day sprint to get America into the crypto central or the crypto capital of the world, they've got 3 different stablecoin bills that are all being processed and looked at right now. Obviously, the Fed wants to get a look in because this is a speculative attack potential on fractional reserve banking, and the shareholders of the Federal Reserve, which are the private banks that have a bank first policy, which is a globalist institution, which leads me to believe that it's not an America first policy, because they are diversified across all the different regions. And just like the Bank of England, after they indebted the UK government, they just dumped England and turned it into a conduit for big pharma, the military industrial complex, and the banking lobby over time. This could happen with the Federal Reserve in America, and the more Bitcoin strategic reserves, they can use that and later be able to do what JFK did just before he was assassinated, where essentially JFK at Treasury issued $4 trillion, which were convertible into silver as a resistance movement against the Federal Reserve System, just as Abraham Lincoln did with the greenback before money was digitized. And so these opportunities exist. So they're going straight into stablecoin regulations. And is it possible that the Trump administration launching through World Liberty Financial, his own stablecoin, that he would like to be the center of the US financial system through his family and his legacy as we enter into this battle? Possible, early days, but stablecoin regulations are the next ones to go through. The next thing that they're going to be looking at after stablecoin regulations within the US is market structure. That's basically who's going to regulate who. Is the Fed through the OCC going to be able to get their grubby mitts on stablecoins? Because they're saying we don't want to launch a central bank digital currency, which essentially says instead you can do stable coins and hands it over to the technocrats. I'll go more about that in the geopolitical section as well. But who regulates who? Is it a security? Is it a money market fund because it's backed by treasuries and it's got a fund manager? We shall see. Anyway, all of that is going to be determined next after the stablecoin regulations. In true crypto capital style, all of the TradFi players within America are now going full YOLO into shitcoinery in the shitcoin casino. There has been applications for XRP ETFs. There have been applications for Dogecoin ETFs. There have been applications for Solana Sol ETFs. There have been applications for Cardano ADA ETFs. And there have been applications to convert the ETH ETFs into ETH staking. Remember what I said about that one. There is going to be a two-tiered market within Ethereum. Those that are using it in self-custody through for DeFi, and those that are going to be holding it through an ETF. And once they start staking, they get essentially a voting right in the governance of the network, unlike Bitcoin, and they can use that in order to build an alternative financial system using their influence in kind of a creature from Jekyll Island hybrid model based upon ETH staking. Once the ETFs are able to get you to put your ETH with them, and then they can stake it for you, pass it on, but they get a control in the governance next. I will be watching that one with great interest, as well as BlackRock saying that they're looking to build a tokenized exchange on top of Ethereum. We're seeing a lot of movement in the layer 2 there. And on the news, there was a bit of a reversal in the ETH price relative to Bitcoin after having a shambles of a performance over the last few years, as we go into this crypto-friendly environment within America that needs a few months in order to catch up, but lots and lots of ETFs, and the battle for control over the crypto market in those lower liquid non-proof of work tokens received as well. Speaking of that, at Bank to the Future, when people want to do things like stake ETH and then convert their ETH stake into Bitcoin, we want to make sure that that doesn't create taxable events through converting fiat into a share that then is backed by a token. And then you go to Lido, and Lido is converting one token to another token, and then you create a taxable event. At Bank to the Future, with our products, we always did it. It's not open to US because it's mainly focused on the non-US market, because we sold our broker dealers to Coinbase so that we could persist in putting together innovation in the right way rather than capture. We had it where you basically rent a validator. You can receive the stake through staking ETH, and then you can convert it into Bitcoin, but you don't necessarily, not tax advice, end up converting that token for another security and therefore create a taxable event. You're simply renting validators so that you can do some of the different types of strategies and build income when you're building your Bitcoin strategy as well. Anyway, at Bank to the Future, a little bit of a plug. We received our EU license in Poland so that we can work with European residents as that regulatory environment goes through, and we can keep the same ethos. And we this week were finally, after a year at Bank to the Future, approved as a financial promotion in the UK, which allows us to open up to UK investors again for our crypto asset services. So if anyone wants to do ETH staking the right way with a Bitcoin ethos, then feel free to create your account at Bank to the Future as well. And you can make sure that you later this year will be, for those of you that stake with us, for example, we'll be launching our Bitcoin Wealth Builder program. And you can get that actually complimentary to anybody that is using us as a customer. Check out when you create an account on the very first page, there's a section there where you can track your Bitcoin wealth building journey and go through the different phases of sorting out the tax or sorting out the inheritance structure, but getting started. Anyway, enough plugging there. What else did we get in the crypto market? Well, Fed Chair Jerome Powell, he was coming out and he was testifying. I think it was a Senate hearing. Maybe I've got the terminology right. But anyway, he was doing those one big loads of questioning. And the Federal Reserve announced or answered one of those questions, stating that it will never create a central bank digital currency. What does that imply to me? Well, it implies to me, remember, there are quasi-opposites. There is, you hand the industry over to the central bank, which is in time of a financial crisis, the central bank can have a tool which can essentially say, we'll let the banks go bust. And you can download this app and you can have your bank deposit can be swapped for a CBDC. That is one mechanism. Or it could say, we'll hand over the model to the technocrats, which is essentially the stablecoin issues, like the PayPal mafia. Like PayPal has its own stablecoin. It looks like Tether is working with Cantors in order to be a part of the ecosystem. Now it's the 18th largest lender to the US government through its stablecoin. And as I said, Trump is getting ready to launch one as well through World Liberty Financial. And so watch for the technocrats to have this battle between stable coins and central bank digital currencies. And it looks like Jerome Powell said, we will not be launching a CBDC. So that's the initial indication, which either means it goes in the stablecoin direction, which is non-fractional reserve banking and an attack on the Federal Reserve System, or will in the future a CBDC be repackaged in some other form where rather than having a CBDC, the shareholders of the Federal Reserve, like JP Morgan and other European banks, they launch their own stablecoin. And then it is the Federal Reserve policy through the regulations they set up at the OCC can do a stablecoin first policy where essentially the banks get to control them. Watch these battles. And remember, you can always peacefully opt out of the proof of weapons network by owning Bitcoin, converting your fiat currency into Bitcoin, and holding enough of your fiat currency in a stablecoin so that at least you don't get the fractional reserve exposure, you get non-fractional reserve exposure and more of a market pricing, as we have seen with other stablecoins. But of course, we will always make sure that I'm giving you the updates as we transition. The Department of Government Efficiency, through Elon Musk, part of the PayPal mafia, doing some awesome work in terms of exposing the system. We'll cover more on the macro side and the geopolitical side. But he started to give some indications that Doge, which is now a growing institution, getting some pushback from the judges at the moment, but they would like to transition to a system where all transactions at the government level start to move onto a blockchain, which is stablecoin. After stablecoin regulations, you can see how this is all shaping up as well. And as I said, remember, Trump is launching his own stablecoin. So is Trump right now setting his family up to become and battle against the Fed or the banks into the future? Remember last time when there was the attack on Trump in order to replace him with the Biden administration, and they used lawfare in order to come after him, and they used all sorts of shenanigans. One of them was what they did to WikiLeaks. They just debanked him, and so all of the banks weren't able to service. So maybe Trump remembers that, and maybe this is the whole world liberty DeFi play as we enter into America being the shitcoin casino of the world. Anyway, we also got an admission from Jerome Powell that there was shenanigans played. Remember, I told you about Nick Carter's revelations around Operation Choke Point 2.0 and how it was used in order to take out the crypto-friendly banks. The Fed said, we'll investigate it. Clearly, something happened. So now the architects of Operation Choke Point 2.0 want to look into themselves, which is kind of what we're seeing around the people that have been appointed, and we'll cover this more in the macro section, to reveal the JFK files and all the different files, the Epstein files, with a same type of person that may be connected to Mossad. So unlikely to reveal themselves. Now the Federal Reserve is investigating themselves for Operation Choke Point 2.0, but there was a admission that there were shenanigans happening as well. The Department of Government Efficiency called for an audit of the Pentagon and an audit of the Fed. Now, this one, Ron Paul, who did more for exposing the Federal Reserve, that launched the original End the Fed campaign, spent his whole life, a man of integrity, fighting against the corruption all the time. One of the very first people to reveal that Congress was funding, Al-Qaeda and various other networks, revealed it in Congress, exposed the whole thing. Then later, WikiLeaks exposed the whole thing after the financial blockade. And now USAID is revealing it as well. Now that we've got all these revelations, there was one man that stayed absolutely on top of the whole thing and has been on the right side of history. And I really want to see the Audit the Fed, which was the compromise after End the Fed, to be implemented while Ron Paul is still with us. And his family, Rand Paul, is a part of the Congress as well. I would really love to see him see the Audit the Fed in his lifetime, a man of integrity. I do believe that would be the ultimate justice. And I hope this actually happens, because we saw what happens. You can start with an audit. You can then lead to a revelation of corruption, which can then lead to the shutting down as an alternative structure exists. And that's exactly what we saw with USAID. And I'm going to be covering more of that in the macro section today. Anyway, we are seeing the new model. Anyway, just to make sure you are there. Now, I am loving everything I'm seeing. But just remember, be ahead of everything. We are replacing one evil with another evil because the system got busted. At Bitcoin Hard Talk, we've been covering this all along. We've been revealing that all wars are deep state wars funded by the Federal Reserve through the International Monetary Fund, which is a mafia racketeering organization to get debt slavery around the world. And intelligence don't work for the national security interest. They work for corporate interest. And then that money gets printed and used in order to bribe Congress. And it uses NGOs in order to siphon money. They say that we're doing it in the name of charity, which goes to the people where those charities are being used to topple governments, implementing covert regime change, all the ones that were declassified by the CIA during the Cold War that are now being used in the fake war on terror in order to prop up the dollar and create constructs like the petrodollar and the euro dollar that we've covered many times on Bitcoin Hard Talk. Well, USAID got exposed, and it is now revealing in plain sight because too many people understood the gig. Now, the average person doesn't really understand it. They still think that there's these, that they're in a fight for their survival, and these crazy people, they don't realize that their taxpayer money is being used in order to create these fake groups. They co-opt the bosses, and then they go into these, terrorist training camps in order to create a narrative, and then they buy the media. So the BBC, it was exposed, completely bought by USAID. The entire Ukrainian media, completely bought by USAID. And Fox News, CNN, we know how they make their money now. It is through the money printing of the Fed that then goes to USAID. The largest recipients of USAID are countries like Israel and Egypt and Jordan. And then they have their, we're replacing democracy with dictators. And then you have the monarchs in there, and they're easy to bribe through these schemes. And then they have a Fed first policy, because then the IMF will topple their currency in a currency war and destroy that country, which is why we created Bitcoin in the first place, as a peaceful resistance against it. Well, all the corruption is being exposed because WikiLeaks exposed it. Julian Assange is now free. The financial system tried to take down WikiLeaks when he exposed it. Instead, there was all of Trump using like the Hillary Clinton emails when all the emails were released. And that just exposed that, that administration, when they were blackmailed under the Clinton administration, read Whitney Webb's book that showed that Epstein was a Mossad operation that blackmailed US presidents in order to change their policy, remove all peace like Oslo Accords, make sure that it wasn't happening, use the media in order to think that it's these crazy terrorist groups that they're funding, and just trick the whole people. The whole damn operation is now in black and white, exposed through AI, through Doge. Why? Because they're moving to a new system. And the new system is radical transparency, so that all of that data can be used in order to build artificial intelligence, which feeds back into the data, like that is funding, example, genocide as a service and occupation as a service in Palestine right now, that requires more and more data. And that's the model that we are shifting to. Anyway, what is the model? I'll go through a bit more now that we've covered that as well. Well, the model is expose it, shut it down, and then get radical transparency that leads to all of the data going through X, going through these artificial intelligence algorithms, and then that can be used for stablecoin monetary policy by those that control the data and are able to implement, a attack on the Federal Reserve System, but replace one evil with another evil, which is the powers that control the stablecoin systems as we transition to this data-driven model. And of course, X at the same time as being able to get access to all this data through Doge, announced that X is now becoming a financial institution by partnering with Visa and launching the payment system, which requires vast amounts of data in order to transition to this stablecoin technocracy. And of course, use Stargate, which is the Federal Reserve printed money used to invest $500 billion into making sure that all these data centers through ex-CIA intelligence operations, like Larry Summers. When that bid went to, instead of going to XAI because it was too blatant, it went to OpenAI and Sam Altman. And so we saw a bid from Elon Musk to bid for ChatGPT. Why? Because DeepSeek came out and said, we disrupt your model, which had an attack on NVIDIA's share price and Microsoft's share price. And remember, Elon comes from a globalist type of environment that is pushing forward this environment because Tesla works with EVs in China as well, where the parts come from, as well as America. But by being able to release DeepSeek, you then get an attack upon it where ChatGPT needs the money when you follow the money. Basically a group led by Elon Musk said, if you don't not turn, if you keep, we're going to bid for your company, 97.4 billion. And remember, by working with the Trump administration, Elon's wealth went up like over 250 billion. He spent 150 billion on the campaign, but his wealth went up significantly. But now he's able to put together a group, bid on OpenAI, so who's got the Stargate contract, and then be able to buy it, and saying that basically the world's largest AI company. But he said, I will remove my bid if and only if Sam Altman sticks to his original philosophy that this stays a not-for-profit company. So he has hook, lined, and sinkered OpenAI that has got the government contract. Basically, Sam Altman now needs to raise approximately 100 billion fast in order to remain a for-profit when he wanted to convert the not-for-profit. And Elon has got his revenge. Now, historically, where did OpenAI get that money from? SoftBank. SoftBank is the Japanese proof of weapons network that is able to use the Japan carry trade, which essentially is a Fed-first bank that created massive inflation within Japan in order to be able to leverage that, borrow that, get the cheap rates, and then invest in things like the Operation Stargate as well. But they don't have the money. They're maxed out because they invested in Stargate. So hook, line, and sinker, checkmate. Sam Altman doesn't have their normal source of funding, and Elon Musk can gobble up the thing and force the policy on it. It either becomes open into Tesla, not X, OpenAI, which is a private company. Basically, you can use those type of financial weapons of mass destruction in order to checkmate your competition. And that is exactly what we are watching. And now remember, they've got the contract that's whipping through all of this data, and we can essentially move into this AI honeypot of data, and then the model can be wash, rinse, repeat. So what do you do if you're Elon? You say, I'll support all the different governments. Hey, Germany, here's the person that will transition. And guess what, Europe? The CIA blew up Nord Stream pipeline, destroyed your manufacturing base. We'll use some Trump tariffs in order to further destroy your economy. And at the same time, we'll ask you to spend more with us. And we can use the fact that USAID was funding all these organizations that led to the open border policy. We can blame it on the Democrats, saying it's Democrat corruption, nothing to do with us, that led to the environment that's leading to everybody questioning what the hell is happening to this invasion. And then you can weaponize all the religious wars and the nationalist wars. And you can use that in order to say, now you need Mega. And what is Mega going to do? Mega's going to copy the MAGA model and say, you need Doge. And we're going to be begging for Doge to expose our corrupt governments and say, please, we'll give all the AI data in the name of Mega. And you can have all the European data. And you can have the UK data. And so now he is choosing the candidates that will fulfill that vision for him and making people happy because, of course, he's exposing the corruption of the proof of weapons network as we transition from one evil to another evil. And speaking of which, we had MIGA, Make India Great Again, so that we can have all of that data. And of course, the different types of negotiations saying that as America retreats, India needs to buy more of our gas as well. And India needs to buy more of our oil. So we're creating these global honeypots of data. What do they need in order to achieve it? Well, they need the rare earth minerals, and they need the gas that is providing all the electricity in these ginormous data centers as we enter into this global war for who's going to control all of the data. Why do you need those rare earth minerals? Well, China has them because you need semiconductor chips. Semiconductor chips is how you power all of this artificial intelligence. And then you need a manufacturing base in order to build all of this big data so that you have the servers controlled in private companies. And China essentially has their model, which is moving towards open source, interestingly. And you have Meta, which is going open source, but consumers get a better model. But what's happening in the middle? Well, these companies like Palantir and various other ones, they have their kind of Israel first type of people like Peter Thiel through Palantir, who is building AI warfare and AI weapons that is deciding how to execute a genocide with machines in Palestine, which is the beta test, as they sell it to other regimes like how they used to sell to apartheid South Africa. And suddenly we get an announcement that anything that South Africa is doing, America cares about it. When the reality is they're pulling the money away from South Africa because USAID, they're exposing it. And they're saying, South Africa, we can't afford it anymore. We're in retreat, as I covered last week as well. But in the middle of that, you've got Israel that's taking all of that data and then selling it to China, because they are in the middle of both and work with both as well. And so it is one big honeypot data play, which is why we're getting more and more freedom of speech right now, and why we are saying we love the fact that you're revealing the corruption, because now they feel safe. The gig is up. The scam is over. But we need to be vigilant and get ahead, as I always make sure you are one step ahead. So with that in mind, now that we understand how this stablecoin, CBDC, Bitcoin world, make sure that you have the peaceful resistance, because in the end, we need it to be exactly as we did with Bitcoin, fight back against the Fed with peaceful proof of work by allowing people to beat inflation, allowing people to own their own data, allowing people to send it without permission. That's what we need to do with AI into the future. And there is a big movement in our industry to try and make open source, decentralized artificial intelligence that can essentially learn from these big honeypots of data. And we can do what we did to Bitcoin, create peaceful resistance moving forward as the Federal Reserve and the central banking cabal fight over CBDCs with the technocrats that fight over stable coins. And we have these currency wars, and we can opt out with the currency that everybody wants and everybody needs, which is Bitcoin proof of work, because it's apolitical, no counterparty risk, peer-to-peer transactions that allow you to beat the price manipulation of the debt-based slavery proof of weapons network called the dollar, and the worst iterations of that, the shit coins like the pound, the euro, and all of the sub ones that are members of the Bank for International Settlements in debt slavery through the International Monetary Fund, where they can just wipe out your wealth and say, we're going to devalue that currency and we're going to shut down, like they did with the Lebanese banking system in 2019, to steal everybody's wealth in these hyper-dollarized economies and central banks that operate on these derivative network of shitcoinery based upon the US dollar proof of weapons network. Right, now I'm going to be going into the second half. If you're watching the clip video, we're going to be moving over to part 2, where I'll tie this all together, go deeper into the USAID stuff, the bigger macro strategies that we're experiencing right now. Do me a favor. If you've enjoyed this, please do like, please do share. I hope you agree with me that everything I'm saying, the algorithms hate. So I rely upon you. Help me get to 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. Put some comments below. I read them all. And share this with as many people as possible, because here is the thing. Bitcoin is a resistance that benefits from as many people joining us. We need more and more people to own Bitcoin. We need them to understand why, and we need them to be protected as we transition to a world of Bitcoin AI and CBDC. So let's move into part 2 this week in macro. Like, share, subscribe.